You see him every single day, right? On TV and podcasts, all over the internet. The interview. It feels like, well, like the bedrock of how we get our information. But what if this thing we take for granted, this cornerstone of journalism, is way more controversial than we realize? What if some people see it not as an art, but as an assault? That's the wild debate we're jumping into. So which one is it? Is the interview, this noble quest for truth, our best way to get a window into someone's mind? Or is it something, I don't know, darker, an intrusion, a violation, even a soul-stealing crime? It's a huge question, and we're going to look at both sides of this argument that's been raging for over 100 years.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll put the interview on trial. Then we'll look at the case against it. Is it an unwarranted intrusion? And then the case for it as a source of truth. After that, we get to meet Professor Umberto Eco, which is where things get really interesting. We'll uncover his secret of interstices and finally tie it all together with the power of narration. We're going to go from the big debate to a super specific, fascinating story that might just change how you see everything.
Okay, let's kick things off with the interview on trial. I mean, for more than 100 years, this thing has been both praised and just torn apart. It's a tool that can build someone's entire reputation, but some people would say it can also destroy lives. The opinions are just, they couldn't be further apart.
So, an unwarranted intrusion. Let's start with the case against the interview. And believe me, some of the most famous, most celebrated minds in history have absolutely hated being interviewed. They didn't just see it as annoying, they saw it as genuinely harmful.
Take the Nobel Prize winner V.S. Naipaul. He said, "Some people are wounded by interviews and lose a part of themselves." That's pretty intense, right? He's not just talking about a bad experience. He's talking about a genuine wound, losing a piece of who you are.
And this isn't some new thing either. Think about Lewis Carroll, the guy who created Alice in Wonderland. He had what people called a just horror of the interviewer. A horror. He apparently never ever agreed to be interviewed. He just wanted to protect himself from what he felt was a total violation.
But maybe the most extreme take comes from Rudyard Kipling. He didn't just dislike them. He went way further. He said it is immoral, it is a crime, just as much of a crime as an offense against my person as an assault. Wow. He literally compared being interviewed to being physically attacked. I mean, that is an incredible accusation to level against journalism. And you can almost feel the sense of violation in this next one. The novelist Saul Bellow, he came up with this really visceral image. He said interviews felt like thumbprints on his windpipe. Just imagine that feeling of being choked or suffocated. That's what it felt like to him.
All right, so we've definitely heard the case against, and it is powerful. But despite all that, the interview is still here. In fact, it's one of the most essential tools we have. So now let's flip the script and look at the defense, the interview as a source of truth.
As the writer Dennis Bryan put it, almost everything of moment reaches us through one man asking questions of another. And because of that, the interviewer holds a position of unprecedented power and influence. And he's got a point, right? I mean, really think about it. Pretty much everything important we learn about people comes from this simple act, one person asking another a question. But here's where it gets kind of messy. A little ironic, actually. A lot of the people who complained the loudest about interviews also did them. Remember Rudyard Kipling, the guy who called it a crime? Well, turns out he once interviewed Mark Twain. And H.G. Wells, he called it an ordeal, but he gave interviews all the time. He even interviewed Joseph Stalin. It just goes to show you how essential the format is, even for the people who say they hate it. So where does that leave us? To get out of this back-and-forth debate, let's look at a real-world example. Let's see the interview in action. And for that, we're going to meet Professor Umberto Eco. He was this brilliant Italian professor and novelist, a guy who seemed to have figured out how to bend time. And, funny enough, it was an interview that revealed his secret. So Umberto Eco the guy was a true genius. A professor, a philosopher, a novelist. His written output was just staggeringly huge and incredibly wide-ranging. You look at what he accomplished and you just have to ask, how is that even possible for one person? Let's put some numbers on it. He wrote over 40 scholarly works of nonfiction. I mean, for most people, that alone would be an incredible life's work. But for Eco, that was just getting started. Because then, on top of all that academic stuff,
His debut novel, The Name of the Rose, sold more than 10 million copies. 10 million. It made him a global superstar. So you can see why the interviewer was just dying to know, how on earth did he find the time to do it all?
And this is where the interview becomes so valuable, because in it, Eco finally revealed his secret. He had this whole philosophy about time that he called interstices, and it's all about how he used those little empty moments in our lives.
So what exactly are interstices? Well, it was Eco's word for all the empty spaces in our day. You know, when you're waiting for an elevator, or you're in a cab, or waiting for someone to show up for a meeting. For most of us, that's just dead time, wasted time. But for Eco, that was where the magic happened. He had this amazing example in the interview. He basically said, look, you're waiting for the elevator to take you from the first floor up to my apartment on the third. In that short amount of time, he claimed, I have already written an article. He was constantly working in these little gaps, these interstices, turning what the rest of us see as wasted moments into incredibly productive time.
Okay, that's a brilliant productivity tip. But how does this connect back to our whole debate about interviews being good or bad? Well, it all comes down to another big idea from Eco's life, the power of narration.
See, way back when he was finishing his dissertation, one of his professors told him something that changed everything. The professor said, you told the story of your research. Instead of just a dry list of facts, Eco had turned it into a narrative, with all the twists and turns included. And that comment just clicked for him.
Eco basically realized that everything can be a story. He said, this is why my essays always have a narrative aspect. And this is why, probably, I started writing narratives novels so late. He understood that weaving ideas into a story was the best way to make them engaging and understandable. It was this secret ingredient in everything he wrote, from academic papers to blockbuster novels. And that brings us right back to our big question. So, is every great interview, at its heart, just a well-told story? Maybe the answer to whether an interview is an art or an assault depends. When it's just trying to extract facts, maybe it does feel like a crime, like those thumbprints on the windpipe. But when it becomes a shared mission, a collaboration to find and tell a story, well, then it becomes something totally different. It's not an assault anymore. It's the story of a life or the story of an idea, and maybe a well-told story is the closest thing to the truth we've got.